First mentioned in Revenge of the Sith, the Outer Rim sieges have been a key part of the Clone Wars since it was introduced to Canon. And they're mentioned a lot. We see them mentioned in the Clone Wars TV show as well, so I figured today we'll take a look at what exactly the Outer Rim sieges are and why they're so important. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So, as many of you know, the Outer Rim sieges are a series of battles carried out at the very end of the Clone Wars. This series of battles really marked the end of the CIS. In essence, it was the Republic starting to push their way into the Outer Rim and into territory that had been controlled by the CIS since the start of the war. It saw the Separatists mostly on the defensive, defending worlds that were very loyal to their cause against Republic invasion. And while it really was very clearly originally intended to be a series of battles fought exclusively in the Outer Rim, the name has come to include many battles fought closer to the core, including battles like Anaxis, which we see in the last season of the Clone Wars. In fact, in a lot of ways, the Outer Rim sieges simply refers to any battle that was going on right up to the very end of the war, or right around that period of time. But from a strategic standpoint, they were vastly important, in particular to the CIS, who were fighting on their last legs. They had started losing the war about midway through, and were really starting to be pushed back into their core territories, which, for the CIS, were all in the Outer Rim. And there are a lot of battles associated with the Outer Rim sieges in general. Things like the Battle of Megiddo, the Battle of Kashyyyk, the Battle of Coruscant, sort of, the Battle of Anaxis, which I mentioned earlier, the Battle of Cato Nemoidia, and the long-standing, long-running Battle of Felucia. But one of the things that almost all of these battles had in common were that the Separatists were on the defensive, with the notable exception of the Battle of Coruscant. In fact, that seems to be the trend for the entirety of the Outer Rim sieges, as I mentioned, the Separatists were defending their territory against a Republic invasion. But with the consequences of these battles being so dire for the Separatists, we see some of the fiercest fighting of the entire conflict during this campaign. It's often that not only were these worlds being defended by the battle droids of the CIS military, but by local militias as well, who were fighting way more fiercely than the battle droids. This ties into the issue that the Empire would have after the end of the war with Separatist holdouts. As you move into these territories that were firmly in favor of the Separatist cause, you start having populations that are firmly supporting the Separatists. And in many cases, that support takes the form of, taking up arms for their cause. And oftentimes, fighting with these militias was way more intense for Republic soldiers than fighting against battle droids. You see, unlike battle droids, who were sort of just piles of metal and bolts who were following orders from, whoever really held their controllers, these militias were made up of civilians, citizens, flesh and bone, who were fighting for their homes and their families against what they saw as a Republic invasion. And many of these battles ended up playing out in a very similar way. The Republic would launch a massive invasion of a territory held by the CIS, which would ultimately be defended by local defenders, battle droids, and led usually by a prominent Separatist leader, since at this point most of the battles were for key strategic locations. During that battle, orders would be given to Separatist forces not to withdraw and to hold the line, seeing as the fact that there really was fewer and fewer places for them to fall back to. So a lot of these became last stands for Separatist leadership. It is during this time period that many Separatist generals were killed in combat, being forced to hold the line basically until the very last man, or droid, I guess, standing. It's during this offensive that leaders like Admiral Trench, Count Dooku himself, and eventually General Grievous would be killed, most of them trying to hold a last line of defense against an advancing Republic force. And ultimately, the disarray caused by the loss of such a vast portion of Separatist leadership would lead to the downfall of the CIS and the end of the war. But like I mentioned, one of the reasons these battles were so fierce was because the Separatists were often fighting with a lot of biological components and local militias who would go on to keep fighting even after the end of the war, in an element known as Separatist holdouts. If you want to learn more about Separatist holdouts and the CIS loyalists who didn't stop fighting at the end of the war, I'll leave a link up here to my video on that. And I want you to let me know down in the comments what you think the Separatists should have done when faced with the onslaught of the Republic. Do you think it makes sense for them to try to draw a line in the sand and hold the best they can, or should they just have kind of surrendered? And if you have anything you want to see me cover in Star Wars, leave it down below in the comments. And last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.